And the root solution to all of them is we just need to get to know our neighbors again and have tight-knit communities again and take care of each other.
Yeah.
Because we know when we know each other, we start to care about each other and we start to look out for each other. And we all start to get on the same page about what policies we want to put forward. Until we can do that, debate over these issues, it's not going anywhere.
This is Jeff Burningham. Thank you for listening to the Extraordinary Us podcast. It's been an interesting year. It's been a tough time. This podcast is here to inspire and uplift you. We're all a lot more alike than we are different, no matter where we come from and what makes us different, and that we all have differences. We're a lot more alike. Let's remember that. I'm bringing you conversations from people that you may or may not have heard of to remind you of that. Also, don't ever let fear play too much into your decision making. Fear often causes us to make bad decisions. And I think that the pandemic has featured that a lot of us are emotionally bleeding out a little bit. We're struggling. I hope that this podcast helps you feel more whole, connect with people around you, listen to ordinary people that are doing extraordinary things. And I have a good friend of mine today in the podcast booth, one of the most exciting, if I may say, Joseph, up and coming entrepreneurs in the country, the United States of America, in the world, and certainly here in Utah, Joseph Woodbury, the CEO and founder of Neighbor.
I like that introduction.
How was it?
I don't know if I've ever been introduced like that.
Yeah, I think it's true, man. That's what I believe. That's what I believe since I first met you,
Yeah,
right?
I love it.
Yeah. So Joseph and I have been friends for several years now. You've probably heard of Neighbor. We'll talk about Neighbor and about, they were just recently in the Wall Street Journal to talk maybe a little bit about that, like front cover Wall Street Journal. Just announced a large financing round a month or two ago. We were just catching up on that.
Yeah.
But Joseph officed in the little venture fund that I started here in Utah, Peak Ventures, now Album. How long were you guys with us in the office? A while.
Oh man, yeah, we were there for a while. We practically took over the space.
You did. When you were taking it over, that's when we finally kicked you out.
That's
and
right.
Said, go find an office.
Yeah, we were cooking breakfast there in the morning. We were
bacon sizzling on the griddle. How long was it? Do you remember?
It was probably 8 months, 10 months. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah, so Joseph is a great up-and-coming entrepreneur, has an exciting story. Let's talk about it. Where did you grow up?
I grew up just outside of Vegas.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you kind of grew up in a political family, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I honestly never felt like I was in a political family growing up. It's kind of in hindsight I realized it.
Yeah.
My grandfather was the county commissioner for all of Las Vegas, and actually, if you go to Vegas and you drive on the freeway there, you'll drive on the Bruce Woodbury Beltway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's kind of known as the father of Vegas transportation. And
seriously, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'll look for that.
Yeah.
And you're saying you're not from a political family?
Growing up,
you didn't feel like
you're playing. I was playing baseball and basketball. I was happy just to go to school, that sort of thing. My dad was the mayor of our small town. I've got an aunt that's a state legislature, an uncle that's a state legislator. More. I mean, our family goes back pretty far in Nevada, so a lot of Nevada roots there, and people get involved. If you go back far enough, we've got people on both sides of the political spectrum.
That's cool. Yeah. So you probably realize that you're a lot more political than most tech CEOs. It's not easy to be political as a tech CEO, right? And it's not popular. It's not easy. And most tech CEOs, I'm speaking generally, just aren't that interested, right, in politics, which I understand why. But how do you view those kind of coming together, or how do you thread the needle there? Just curious.
Yeah, I've definitely always been interested, and I'd really say it's informed part of the reasons why we've started Neighbor and why we're building Neighbor.
Yeah.
You've noticed this. I've noticed this. I think everyone's noticed this. Like, political discourse is really starting to take a turn for the worse. I mean, the last decade has just really gone downhill. And the reason is, in my opinion, is people are talking face to face less. they're not having these types of conversations.
Do you think that's the root cause?
I think that's the root cause. People are social beings. Like we thrive off of being together. When we're together, we don't say the same things that we say on Facebook or on Twitter or on messaging.
Yeah.
I call it a fundamental law of human physics, right?
Yeah.
People interact differently with each other when they're in the same room. We realize we have a lot more in common than we have different.
Yep. It sounds familiar.
It does sound familiar, yeah. So with Neighbor, we're a marketplace for storage.
Yeah.
But we called the company Neighbor. Like, if you really want to dive deep into who we are, we called this company Neighbor because we're the first hyper local marketplace. We are connecting not, an Airbnb host in Thailand to someone who's on vacation from the United States, or, I go to Chicago, I need an Uber. I take an Uber in Chicago. I'm probably never going to talk to that Uber driver again. Mm-hmm. I'm probably never going to talk to my Airbnb host again.
Good point. Yeah.
But Neighbor is the first hyper local marketplace. We are literally connecting neighbors with each other.
And that's the big vision, right?
That is the big vision. And you get these really cool scenarios where you'll have someone who will message in and they're like, I've lived next to my neighbor for 5 years and I have never said more than hi to them on my way to work. That's just kind of how society is today.
Yeah.
We don't talk to our neighbors. It's awkward. It's especially in big cities, you kind of just walk past your neighbor, you don't care, you don't want to talk. There's no more reasons to talk to them. And what they said, what these users will say is like, Neighbor kind of forced me to talk to my neighbor because I booked their space. And
now I'm storing my wedding gown in my neighbor's. I'm making that up, but whatever.
Or my boat, like I just bought a new boat. It's sweet. I don't have room for it.
Yeah.
But my neighbor had this big old RV pad or a nice third car garage. And so now I'm storing my boat in my neighbor or my boxes. And I drove over to their house and with my boxes and they came out
and helped you unload. Yeah.
And helped me unload.
Yeah.
And we got to talking. It gave us an excuse. People need an excuse to talk to their neighbors.
Yeah.
And what we realized while we were talking, putting boxes in a garage is, we actually have a lot in common. And I'm a Democrat and they're a Republican and we don't hate each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like we on social media we think we do, but as soon as you start talking in person, you realize, wow, I actually like you. You have a lot of similar interests. And so this sort of connection, this neighborhood connection, I think it is more important than anything. In politics, we talk so much about, governmental spending programs. The hot topics are always healthcare and immigration and all of these things, which are very, very important issues to get right. But they all like completely pale in comparison to the fact that, and the root solution to all of them is we just need to get to know our neighbors again and have tight-knit communities again and take care of each other.
Yeah.
Because we know when we know each other, we start to care about each other and we start to look out for each other. And we all start to get on the same page about what policies we want to put forward. Until we can do that, debate over these issues it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if you noticed on the little skateboard handle when you walked into the podcast studio here, and then on this art behind me, love is the answer, right? That's Shout out to Mr. Brainwash, one of my favorite kind of graffiti artists. Love is the answer, right? And that's kind of what we're saying. And
Totally.
We've lost that. We have totally lost that on social media. Technology is a big root cause of this as well, right? How do we come back together? Or maybe I should say, what other root causes other than face-to-face conversations, understanding and loving each other, getting to know each other, what other issues do you see in modern society that cause these problems?
I mean, I'm probably way too keyed in on that because that's the problem we're solving at Neighbor. We are literally bringing communities together. But I believe that fundamentally that is the one. I mean, just think about it. We can talk all day long about gimmicky solutions, but until we start to interact with each other, talk to each other, I mean, even these problems we're facing today, where constantly we're creating groups that are pitted against each other. We have groups like police versus non-police, right?
Yep.
We have Democrats versus Republicans. It's all these versus groups, and that's not how you create good policy, right? Good policy comes from strong communication, and it doesn't mean the policy needs to be moderate, right? It doesn't mean the solution needs to be watered down or anything, but it gets created well when we're all on the same team.
Yeah.
Like a company,
Yeah.
like a well-run company. If you have factions in a company that are fighting against each other, that doesn't go anywhere. But when you have a team that's cohesive and everyone is constantly talking to everyone and all the different departments, and we're all on the same team trying to achieve the same objectives, things get really efficient real fast. And you start to figure out great policy really fast because you're all headed towards the same objectives. That doesn't mean people don't disagree. In fact, if you've hired excellent individuals in a company, a strong sign of that is that they'll start to disagree.
Yeah.
Right? That has to happen. If no one's disagreeing in your company, you haven't hired talented people.
Yeah. And if no one, as the CEO, if no one's telling you no or that they disagree with you, that's also a cause for concern, right? So tell us a little bit more. So out of Las Vegas, here in Utah, starting Neighbor, an exciting up-and-coming company. Tell us a little bit more about the genesis of that. And by the way, obviously culture and vision is emergent. It's constantly emerging. It's changing oftentimes and tweaking. I don't remember really talking about this community aspect as much when you first started talking to us. Is that has this come into focus for you over time, or is that kind of always been the end goal? Which, by the way, what Neighbor does, if you don't know and if it's not obvious already, it matches up neighbors or people that live near you that have empty space that's not being used and that can store your own space. It's disruptive potentially to the storage industry. It's an efficient use of space. It's a smart idea. It's part of the creator economy, sharing economy.
Yep.
That's what Neighbor does. But Joseph, like he said, has this much bigger vision now. Has that always been the case, or?
So yes and no.
Yeah.
To go back to the very genesis of the idea, this idea came about in the way that I think all good ideas come about. My co-founder, Preston, who you know,
Mm-hmm.
he needed a place to store his items. He and his wife were going to be out of the country for 4 months, and so needed a storage unit. And they had the same experience that I think everyone has when they go to get a storage unit. There was no vacancy anywhere near him. He was going to have to drive a half hour to some industrial park a town over just to find a storage facility with any vacancy.
Yeah.
He was going to have to pay, $200 or $300 a month.
Yeah.
Which, like, think about that. There's nothing we pay $200 or $300 a month for. Like, your Netflix is $10 a month. Storage is the single largest subscription payment most Americans are making.
That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that.
So he's going to have to pay all this money, and he's like, I'm paying all this money and driving my stuff over all for this dirty, dingy concrete box. There's got to be a better way. And again, I think that's how all good ideas come. Like, feel the pain
Yep.
yourself.
Yep. And motivated to come up with a solution.
So what did he do? He found a friend. He's like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go pay that money. Found a friend with a nice clean garage. He went and stored his items.
So he did this. He was the first neighbor.
He was the first neighbor. Preston is the first neighbor.
Okay.
So he went and stored his items in the garage. Went out of the country, came back, went to pick his items up, and just thought, wow, this was such a better solution. I felt so much more peace of mind knowing my items were in a nice, clean, safe garage than in some industrial park.
Yeah.
And I saved a lot of money. Why doesn't everyone do this? Why isn't there some sort of directory service for where there's got to be an empty garage in every single neighborhood in the country?
Yeah.
So why doesn't everyone do this? He told me and my co-founder about it, and I remember I went home to my wife that night and I was like, that is the best idea I've ever heard in my entire life.
Number one.
So The
Were
first
you on
answer,
the path, by the way, to becoming an entrepreneur? Sorry.
no.
Yeah, you weren't, right? Because you kind of have a non-traditional path. I'm saying for an entrepreneur, you're a really sharp kid. I think like a valedictorian and a Bain consultant, which I can empathize with this. I met one of my current business partners running the management consulting club in college, right?
Cool.
Yeah, in the business school. And so, and that's kind of the path that you were on, correct?
Yeah, super boring. That's what I was content to do.
But okay.
I worked for an investment bank, and then
Yeah.
I worked for a private equity firm, and then went to Bain and spent some time there, and was totally content to go do professional services. I had a lot of fun consulting. You're helping big companies make strategic decisions, and you're helping them perform better, which is good for everyone involved. I felt it was very value add. But I went home to my wife and I was like, this is the best idea I've ever heard. All three of us were like that, by the way. All three of us weren't planning on starting a business. None of us were.
Oh, none of you guys were.
We were all in our senior year. We'd all accepted full-time jobs
Oh,
already.
wow. Okay.
And we had start dates and all of that. And, we were all married, and, I just had my first child. And so Preston then has this idea. We start working on it. And with no funding or any promise of funding,
Yeah.
we'd won a couple business competitions.
Yep.
We all called our jobs and said, hey, we're not going to show up.
So how have you enjoyed being an entrepreneur? Was that a good decision?
Oh, it's been a blast.
Yeah.
It's so meaningful to build a team.
Yeah.
Team building. A lot of people talk about the
team,
company, but you just love to work with the people you get to work with.
Yeah. How many people work at Neighbor now?
We're I think we're over 50 now.
Over 50.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you took, how long was it before you raised your first round of money from Peak Ventures, the lowly Peak Ventures Now album?
That's
right. Because by the way, your second round was led by none other than Andreessen Horowitz, correct? One of the most well-known venture funds in the world.
Yeah. It's about 6 months.
Okay, so 6 months.
It's about 6 months working on it with no salary.
Yeah. That's how it is.
Just, we took
That's why you were in our office, paying no rent.
That's right. That's right. Took the 15 grand we'd won from business competitions and just plowed it into experimental ad stuff to see if there was something there. I think we closed the round with album the week I was supposed to show up to Bain.
Okay.
And I had already told him I wasn't going to show up, but we closed it, and it was kind of at the last possible moment where you're like, we got, this is a great idea. It's working, but we don't have any money.
Yeah. Did you email that over to your Bainies, your fellow, eat this suckers? I'm doing what all you want to do,
No.
I'm
No,
kidding.
I fully believed that, 5 years from now, they'd probably be telling me you're such an idiot.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
turned down Bain.
They're not saying that now because in the news recently, in the last month or two, you raised a Series A round from Andreessen Horowitz. Jeff Jordan, one of the partners, went on the board, right? How has that been, by the way?
He's been awesome. So Jeff's background, we really wanted Jeff.
By the way, he's on the board of Airbnb, right? And
Instacart, Pinterest.
Pinterest. I mean, you all have heard of all of these companies.
Yeah.
And Neighbor, baby.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted him. We'd raised money from really great venture firms here in Utah, Album and Pelion. We had strong partners that we were really excited about. So kind of the next step for us, there's not a lot of marketplaces founded in Utah. So we were excited about Andreessen, but we were even more excited about Jeff because he's the marketplace guy. I mean, he ran eBay.com, and then when they bought PayPal, he was the president of PayPal, and then he was the CEO of OpenTable and took them public. So just marketplace after marketplace after marketplace. And then you already mentioned all the marketplaces he's invested in since he turned from operator to investor. And so that was really exciting to finally not only get that expertise on the board, but also kind of the validation there of Jeff taking a look at it and saying, yeah, this is a huge marketplace opportunity.
That's exciting.
There's something here.
Hey guys, it's Jeff. Thank you so much for listening to the Extraordinary Us podcast. There's a lot of momentum behind the podcast right now, and we are so excited. I've got a special guest with me for a second here, my wife, Sally.
Hello, good to be here.
Why are you here, Sal?
We're starting a new podcast together, which I am super excited about. It is called Under Our Bed.
And we are literally people under our bed recording
We are
right now.
sitting right under our bed.
And if you want to hear more about why we called it Under Our Bed, tune in to our first episode, wherever you get your podcasts, because we're going to explain what it means. We hope to have candid and meaningful conversations together about issues that are relevant to you today.
Absolutely.
Good night, Sal.
Good night.
I think Marketplace is next for Utah, by the way. Like, I think marketplaces are rising, led by Neighbor and a couple others I won't mention here in Utah, right? Do you agree with me, by the way?
I totally do. And I think it's about time.
Yeah, it's about time.
There's kind of, we'll call it 3 phases of Utah tech. And I'm probably oversimplifying it, but I think of like the Novell WordPerfect phase that really got us started and put us on the scene and attracted talent. And a lot of those people left and started companies. And we kind of entered this second phase, which I think we're still in. We're kind of at the tail end of it. And that is like Utah became a SaaS powerhouse. Sales teams, like that's our bread and butter in Utah. We've had a bunch of $2-3 billion exits. You can run down the list: Qualtrics, Pluralsight, Instructure, et cetera, et cetera. Now Podium and some of the newer
Divvy,
right?
MX.
Well, and then we're kind of at the tail end of that SaaS. We started to push into like fintech, and that's been interesting. We've got Divvy and we've got MX and we've got
Pattern.
What are they called up in Salt Lake? The Galileo, right?
Yeah.
Huge. And Utah kind of started to break into fintech. I really think the next phase is marketplaces. And that's good for Utah because all of the largest internet tech companies, they're 100% marketplaces. Google, right? It's a search marketplace. Netflix is content marketplace. Amazon, e-commerce marketplace. Airbnb, Uber, hospitality and transportation marketplaces. Every single, Facebook, it's a social marketplace, right? Every single major tech company that you've heard of, it's a marketplace because you need the scale of consumer marketplace. You need the scale of people in order to build something that big. In a SaaS business, they're great. You get to that $2-3 billion range though, and all of a sudden you start running out of SMBs to sell to, right? There's only so many businesses, but there's unlimited consumers. And so that's good for Utah because we need that. We need an Amazon based out of Utah. That's what we're trying to become. We use that internally sometimes. We talk about Neighbor becoming the Amazon of Utah.
And a household name, right?
A household
outside
name.
of Utah.
Starts to attract a different level of talent too.
Super exciting. I'm so bullish on the economy here in Utah and on the next decade. I mean, this is why, as you know, I ran for governor, and I'm so optimistic about what's coming. You're at the forefront of that, Joseph. You've raised several rounds, Neighbors in all 50 states now.
That's right.
Tell us about what's been some of the most exciting parts. What are a couple of highlights and maybe what's on the horizon or whatever?
Yeah, you mentioned that. I did a Clubhouse a few weeks ago, and one of the questions they asked was,
"Are you on Clubhouse much, by the way?"
Not
I'm
much.
Not.
Yeah.
I've opened it like 5 times and I spend less than a minute and then I'm out. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think it's cool. I think it's cool. I just have not spent any time there. Maybe we should.
Yeah, it kind of feels like where Twitter was 10 years ago. It's like you got on Twitter and there were some power users just like there are on Clubhouse today. But Twitter just wasn't, I'd get on there and I'd check right out. These days though, like
spend time on Twitter.
You spend time, right?
I don't, but you do. Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
But so sorry, I missed you did a Clubhouse.
So I did a Clubhouse. One of the questions was, how do you know when you've achieved product market fit?
That's a good question.
It's a good question, and it's totally just a loaded question. Like there's so many answers to that question. But a lot of people talk about, and I'm answering your question, like what's some exciting things have happened? A lot of people think product market fit is like having a high NPS score. Like if your customers love you, you have product market fit. I don't think that's true because we've had a really high NPS score since like month one, and we did not have product market fit. It took us several years to get product market fit to where we really felt like, okay, consumers love this. They're dragging us along, and so it's not NPS. I've made the joke before that I had an investor tell me once that product market fit for a marketplace is when Jeff Jordan joins your board.
So you got it. Nailed it.
I'm not even sure if that was true. Like when Jeff joined, we were doing really well, but like we still had some stuff to work out. But there came a time after that round where we were looking at our data, and I was looking at our data and all the markets we were in. We were kind of running a very market-centric approach. And I looked at all of our target markets, and then I saw this other market, and I was like, what's that market? And I went to our head of growth, and I was like, are we in this market? I didn't think we were in this market. And he was like, no, we're not in that market. And I was like, well, it's our fastest growing market,
Yeah.
And then that just started happening, and all of a sudden, this other category was our fastest growing market. And now we don't even think about markets. Like we are a fully nationwide. And that was a really exciting moment, because that to me is product market fit. When your business is growing in places where you don't think you are, you're not good. Spending money.
Yeah, that's exciting.
It's because people just love it. They're just raving about it.
And they're talking about it, telling their friends, word of mouth is going, and the flywheel is moving.
That's right.
Starting a business, any business isn't straight and to the right. There are tough days and hard times, as you well know. What are some of, to give our listeners a feeling of, what are some of the hardest things that you've overcome, either in your life or in your business? And how have you overcome that? Give us some hope.
Yeah, there have been a ton.
Yeah.
Early in Neighbor,
it
was like, it was just the context switching all the time. We were running, you've all heard about the chicken and egg problem. And when we first started Neighbor, we'd go 3 months and we'd be like, supply. This is the most important thing.
I remember this. Yeah,
3 months later, we'd be like, demand. And that was like so hard, because it's hard to manage as a leader, because what do you tell your employees? Is supply the most important? What should we be focusing on? You're constantly switching.
Yeah.
Now we're like, that doesn't switch back and forth anymore. We're a supply constrained business. We know that. It's been this way for years, and we grow as fast as we acquire new supply.
So supply has been the challenge, or is the constant challenge now.
And it's not a challenge anymore, but for a long time, once we figured out we were a supply constrained business, it was like, okay, how can we create the efficiencies there?
Yeah.
And now we've kind of figured out growth channels, and so we're just kind of leaning in really hard to the supply.
Cool. That's exciting. And so you're excited about that. And that was a challenge at first.
Yeah, now it's our advantage, right? This is our supply is our disruptor. If you think about it, these storage facilities, the largest storage company in the world's $43 billion publicly traded company. In fact, until Qualtrics went public, the largest company in the state of Utah was a storage company.
Yeah.
And
the company that will not be named.
The company that will not be named.
I'm just making that.
They're great. We don't really compete against each other. They're like 97% occupied, and we're doing great. So like clearly it's just a big market.
Yep.
They don't have any operating costs. It doesn't cost anything to run a storage facility. You're probably invested in a bunch of storage facilities, right?
I am. Yeah, on the real estate side.
So you get this.
What's interesting is I like invest to disrupt myself.
Yeah, that's right.
Like I own storage facilities, and then I invest in Neighbor. We own a lot of real estate and do a lot of transactions. We invest in Homey, right? It's interesting, but that's the way of the world, right? People are, if you're not disrupting yourself, if you're not creating disruption within your organization, within your personal life, et cetera, you're not growing, and you've got to disrupt yourself to grow.
That's right. Yeah, that's like Mark Zuckerberg, he's always saying that, right? If we don't build the next Facebook, we're dead.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So these storage facilities, their biggest inhibitor to growth is building more space. It takes a lot of CapEx to lay down to build these. Whereas neighbor, our advantage here is we can just roll in and we can onboard a bunch of space. Like today on the platform, we have, it would cost a traditional self-storage facility over $5 billion in CapEx investment to build the square footage we've got on the platform nationwide.
That's exciting, man.
And we did that with $9 million in venture money, right? That's efficiency, right? That's a marketplace coming in and providing a huge value add where we can unlock all this latent supply, and all of a sudden consumers, a lot of people talk about businesses that save people money. Neighbor, our users, it's not like 10% off your Amazon cart, like you're saving $10 a month. Again, storage is the biggest subscription expense most Americans have. So if someone switches from a storage unit to a neighbor unit, they're saving thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
We're talking, we'll give you a stimulus check every year for the rest of your life if you'll just use a neighbor unit. It's
meaningful. And that's what marketplaces can do, right? With efficiency, like you said, which is why they're so disruptive, why they can get so large. How's it been for you building in the Utah community in Silicon Slopes? In season 1, I think it was episode 8, we had Clint Betts on of the Extraordinary Us podcast. We spoke about kind of the burgeoning ecosystem here in Utah. It's called Silicon Slopes. I think it's a clear number 2 to Silicon Valley. I think it's established itself as that of all the Silicon whatevers, across the world. It's an exciting place to be. It's not perfect, no doubt about it. I'm just curious, what's your experience been and what's neighbors' experience been with, speaking of community, in this tech community within Utah, the Silicon Slopes?
So I love Utah. It's just a different community. I remember when we first started this business, we were nobody, we were this super tiny marketplace. It was like another marketplace that is this really
another marketplace dream?
Yeah, another marketplace dream. And you hear stories about Silicon Valley, so cutthroat, right? That's kind of the environment there.
Yeah.
I was able to sit down with 5 CEOs of billion-dollar startups way ahead of us as a nobody. And I think that's kind of the culture we have.
Yep.
Is people are willing to share, they're willing to help out, they're willing to collaborate.
That's part of our secret sauce, right? I think here.
Totally. Yep. It's you go back to the community. What does Utah do well? Community. And what is neighbor doing? We're exporting that to the world. We're bringing every state should have what we have.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good way of saying it, right?
Yeah.
We're exporting community to the world.
That's right.
So it's been good for you in Silicon Slopes. You've enjoyed it. And
it's been great. I do think we're going to have growing challenges. We're on the map now. Yeah. I mean, and Andreessen, you talked about Andreessen. This is the first time they've ever led around in Utah.
Yep.
And that's starting to happen with a lot of the major firms. A lot of the major firms are leading their first rounds in Utah. And so people have their eye on Utah and what's going to happen now. As we enter this next phase, as we start to have these major businesses, what do we do with that? Do we take what we've built and all the great things we've built? People are flocking here.
Yeah. Because of quality of life, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I looked at the immigration, University of Utah does their state by state immigration numbers, and our single biggest contributor this last year is California.
Yep.
California.
In migration.
Yeah. They're coming here because we're different. Right?
Yeah.
They're coming here because we're not Silicon Valley. And so we may go through some growing pains here. If we decide to get big and we decide to just go copy Silicon Valley, we're not going to have anything special anymore.
Yeah.
So that's something we got to be careful of.
How do we scale up? How do we become, but stay ourselves? I totally agree with you. We're not Silicon Valley. We never will be. We never should try to be. You know, we should be ourselves. Any advice or thoughts on how we do that?
Yeah, I think we have to double down on what's working, right? That's what you do in a company. When you've got a model and it's working, the things that are working, you double down on. The things that aren't working, you cut.
Yeah.
And so I'm not the right person. There's politicians making these decisions, but I hope they're thinking about that. I hope they recognize that we shouldn't try.
Politicians think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I hope so.
You're giving them a lot of credit.
Yeah, you're almost a politician.
Almost, but not. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is exciting times here in Utah, no doubt about it. So one last time, I just want to talk about, so the big vision for Neighbor is to connect neighbors via storage, but really to help build community, face-to-face interactions, like you said. Any sneak peeks into the future of Neighbor? Like, will you expand from storage? Obviously, storage is a huge market. We've mentioned that, but just any final thoughts kind of about community before we pivot into maybe a little bit more personal stuff?
Yeah, so definitely we will. Like the vision for Neighbor, we used a generic name for a reason. Like we believe in the term neighbor. We believe in it more than Mr. Rogers believed in it. So we want to do everything we can to connect neighbors in a lot of ways. Storage is the core that we're starting with. Mm-hmm. And we think we can build a $50 billion storage marketplace. But beyond that, we want to start expanding into like, what are all the rest of the things you could do for your neighbors? Once we've built this really strong, robust, communicating, hyperlocal network in cities, we get, these days I look on our sales channel and I'm always like, I read through the cities where we get reservations every day and I'm like, I've never heard of that city before. So we're building these networks in like cities with names I've never heard of in Virginia and Minnesota and all these states. What are we going to do with that? And we have some strong ideas that we'll share when the time's right. But
yeah,
we have some really exciting things that we're going to do with that community network.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see what's next for you and Neighbor. Obviously, you're not just a CEO and founder. You're a dad of 3, or has the family grown?
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Has it been hard for you to balance being the CEO, juggling, family and that, or, what have your experience been like?
So I've loved it. I think a lot of people talk negatively about that, almost like they're competing priorities, like, oh, it's so hard. I have a startup and I have 4 kids. I like to tell people I have 5 startups.
Which one's going best, Joseph?
Yeah. The 4 that live in my house.
Oh, good. That's great. That's what it should be, right?
That's right.
But sometimes it's hard to stay focused in that regard.
Yeah, I believe that they don't need to compete with each other. They're working hard and building something great is good for a family, and building a family is good for, I've taken so many lessons from building a strong family to, building a strong company, because ultimately a company is about relationships as well.
Yep.
So it's definitely hard at times. Like I don't want to like sugarcoat it. Like there is a lot to balance there, but I just have a phenomenal spouse, and we're just really intentional about it. I think that's the big thing. When I'm home, and I'm 100% at home. When I'm at work, I'm at work. My wife was joking with me the other day. People ask her sometimes, like, how do you deal with, Joseph is obviously building a startup, like it's hard, and you work long hours and stuff like that. And she was like, well, I work hard all day long and I never get a break, so why should Joseph?
Exactly. And she doesn't get the accolades, right?
That's right.
You might. She doesn't get to be on the cover of magazines or whatever, although she should be. Yeah, that's a good perspective. I agree with that. And balance is it's the elusive balance that's never really there. There are seasons of imbalance in life, no doubt about it, that you hope to you hope to pour yourself into a business or into whatever it may be, and you hope that it leads to more balance and, of course, happiness kind of down the road. Any other life lessons that you apply to your work at Neighbor or in your family that you'd like to share with our audience? Things that have been really meaningful or impactful for you?
Well, I agree with what you just said. That, and I don't know if imbalance is the right word, but I like to think of, I heard someone one time, they give the example of, you go to the circus and they have those plate spinners. Yeah. Those people that spin plates. Yeah. That is life. Yeah. Right? It's they're never going to be equal. You're going to be over here spinning one plate, and then you got to go over to the other end and start spinning that plate, or else it's going to fall. And you can't let any plates fall, right? But you can focus on one at one time and then another at another time. Like, I think that's what balance is. It's not about treating things equally. It's about addressing them in their time of need, right?
Yeah, and being present, right?
Being present.
present as the CEO when you're there, being present as the father when you're with your children, or, the husband when you're with your wife. I think it's about being present, but that is hard to do. That's another thing that technology has really made it hard to do. It's interesting. I'm working on a lot of things right now, and I find myself almost kind of being a little ADD, or like it's really hard for me to focus in on one thing. And technology has exacerbated that.
Yeah.
It's made it even more difficult, which is frustrating.
Totally. I heard someone say almost the exact, I was listening to a talk by one of your friends, Mitt Romney.
Yes.
And they were asking him about this, and he basically gave the same answer you did. He said, how did you build like one of the top private equity firms in the history of the country and run the Olympics and all this stuff? And he said a lot of people go home, and they might go home earlier than I do, but they go home and watch TV.
Yeah.
And I go home and I'm present. I am present, I'm focused. And that takes some discipline. You can't go watch TV all the time. Like, you got to cut out some of that stuff.
That's for sure. It is. It's not easy. That's for sure. Joseph, it's exciting to see what you're building at Neighbor. I'm excited for the future. I love that you brought this practical problem of storage, which is just like you said, when Preston brought it to you, it was like, duh, that's such a great idea. But now you've broadened your scope, your vision, your perspective, and it's all about community. It's about bringing people together face to face, creating community, helping us understand a lot of what we talk about on the Extraordinary Us podcast, that we're in this together. We're all on the same journey. We need each other. We're all a lot more alike than we are different, and I think that's exciting. Good work, man.
Thanks.
But
you're doing the same thing on the podcast, right? So
I'm trying to
we're all
a little
in
bit
this together.
We are all in this together. That's true. Any parting thoughts, or as we leave, anything how could people find you? How could people learn about Neighbor? Any other life lessons or things that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, pretty easy we made it pretty easy to find us. We're just neighbor.com. or if you want, most people don't know this. This is a little known fact about Neighbor, but if you ever type in lovethyneighbor.com, it'll also go to our website.
Really?
Yeah.
You have that too. Love Thy Neighbor.
That.
I like that.
So pretty easy to find us. But yeah, I believe, there's only a few fundamental problems that can be solved right now. Like, one of them's energy. We've got a lot of people working on that. Bill Gates is doing a lot of work there with nuclear energy and stuff. And the other one is community. Like, if we can create sustainable power sources and we can come together as a community and like each other and not hate each other, then we're going to be okay, right? It's all you need. Two things, energy and relationships.
I like that.
So yeah, come join us in building communities. Sign up to meet your neighbor.
That's awesome, Joseph. We'll do that. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, definitely.
Always good to be with you. I love entrepreneurship and I love entrepreneurs. I can relate a little bit to Joseph in that in college he was thinking of a little bit more maybe corporate or traditional path, and then pivoted pretty quickly to entrepreneurship. I have a similar story, and I love entrepreneurship. It challenges you every day to be your best. It is an accelerated path of learning. That's one of the things I love most about it. So impressed with Joseph and Neighbor, their growth. It's an exciting marketplace for the entire country in all 50 states. Watch for neighbor.com. Most importantly, he's got to make money. The business has to work. It's got to make financial sense, et cetera, et cetera. But I love his focus on community. We can do better at that in our world and in our country, in our state. We can do better at that. And in as much as Neighbor helps us actually meet our neighbors, be connected to our neighbors, that's all about what this Extraordinary Us podcast is about. We're all extraordinary. I really believe that. All of us. We're also all very ordinary in a lot of ways. I hope this is a reminder of you, for you of that today. And I hope that you will take some time this week. Get to know your neighbor, whether you're renting space there or just waving and talking and shaking hands, giving hugs, hopefully, if you've been vaccinated. And let's create a better community here in our world. It's up to us, each one of us, to make a difference. I appreciate Joseph and the good work his team is doing at Neighbor to help us see that and do that.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Extraordinary Us podcast with Jeff Burningham. Please help us grow by leaving a rating and review and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Also, tell your friends and share on social media. See you again next week.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Jeff.
And Sal.
I'm here with my wife. Why? Because we're starting a podcast together.
Yes, we are.
And it's called
Under Our Bed.
Why is it called that, Sally?
Because we are sitting under our bed right now. In this podcast studio.
Yes. And we're going to be talking about things that are interesting, vulnerable, relevant,
funny.
So check it out. Funny if you're on. So check it out wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to The Extraordinary Us. Look for Under Our Bed with Jeff and Sal.
Check it out.
Good night.
Good night.